December 11th, 1978, 3 a.m. JFK Airport, Queens, New York, $6 million in cash and jewelry. Gone in under an hour. No shots fired, no alarms triggered, no fingerprints left behind. The Lufthansa heist, the biggest cash robbery in American history at the time. And the man who made it happen, who gave Jimmy Burke the nod, who approved the plan, who set everything in motion, wasn't anywhere near that airport. He was asleep in his bed in Brooklyn. His name was Paul Vario, and almost nobody remembers him. You know Henry Hill. You know Jimmy Burke. James Conway in the movie. You've probably seen Goodfellas a dozen times, but the man at the center of all of it, the quiet boss who ran the whole machine, the real architect of one of the most profitable criminal operations in New York history, he's been quietly erased from the story. That's not an accident. That's exactly how Paul Vario wanted it. This is the true story of the man behind the movie, the forgotten godfather, the one who almost got away with everything. Let's start with what Goodfellas got right. Paul Sorvino played him as Paulie Cicero, calm, measured, paternal, a man who never raised his voice because he never had to, a man who moved through rooms and made other men nervous just by sitting down. That part was accurate. What the movie didn't capture was the scale, the sophistication, the decades of operational discipline it took to build what Vario built. Goodfellas turned him into a supporting character in Henry Hill's story. In reality, Paul Vario was the story. Hill was just a supporting player who outlived everyone else and got to write the book. Paul Vario was born July 10th, 1914 in Brooklyn, New York. His parents, Pietro and Mary, had come from Campania, Italy, the same southern region that produced a disproportionate share of the American Mafia's founding generation. Pietro worked construction. The family was working class, Catholic, unremarkable. 5 sons. 4 of them went straight. Paul didn't. By 15, he was running with street crews in East New York, not as muscle. Vario was small, wiry, not built for brawling. He was valuable for something else. He could think. He understood how things moved. Goods, money, information. He had an instinct for logistics that most criminals never develop. He saw supply chains where other kids saw stolen trucks. First arrest at 16. Burglary, 90 days. His father was devastated. His mother wept. Paul Vario did not care. He had found his calling. Throughout the 1930s and into the 1940s, Vario built relationships with the Lucchese crime family. The Lucchese's ran labor unions, gambling, and construction rackets across Brooklyn and Queens. They were methodical, disciplined, and profitable. Exactly what Vario admired. He made himself useful. Errands first. Collections, deliveries, low-level work that let him prove one thing above everything else. He could keep his mouth shut. He got arrested multiple times during this period: 1941, 1946. Burglary, assault, conspiracy. Every time he went in, served his time, said nothing, came out, and went back to work. In the Mafia, that kind of record is a resume. By 1950, Paul Vario was officially made, inducted into the Lucchese family as a full member, which meant he could now have his own crew, his own territory, his own earners. He was given control of operations in Canarsie and East New York, working-class neighborhoods in southeastern Brooklyn. He needed a headquarters. He found one in the most unremarkable place imaginable, a junkyard on Avenue D in Canarsie. From the outside, it was exactly what it looked like: scrap metal, dead cars, grease and rust, and the smell of motor oil. Vario had an office trailer on the property, a desk, a phone, a coffee pot, and a safe. That was his command center for the next 2 decades. Inside that trailer, he ran one of the most sophisticated cargo theft operations in American history. Here is what Paul Vario understood before almost anyone else in organized crime understood it. John F. Kennedy Airport was a gold mine. In the 1960s and 70s, JFK was the busiest cargo airport in the country. Every day, hundreds of millions of dollars in goods flowed through those terminals: electronics, pharmaceuticals, jewelry, furs, cash, and the security infrastructure protecting all of it was, by modern standards, laughably inadequate. Vario didn't just steal cargo. He built a system to steal cargo. Step 1 was intelligence. He had informants embedded inside the cargo operation: baggage handlers, warehouse supervisors, supervisors, security guards. These men fed him information about incoming shipments, what was coming in, when it was arriving, where it would be staged, how long before it moved. Vario paid them well. They were loyal because it was profitable to be loyal. Step 2 was assessment. Vario reviewed every tip personally. Was the score worth the risk? How many men did it require? What was the exposure window? He thought through contingencies, exit routes, alternative plans if something went wrong. He approached robbery the way a legitimate executive approaches a business deal. Step 3 was execution. His crew would intercept the target, either at the airport itself or as the truck moved through Queens or Brooklyn. Drivers were taken at gunpoint, secured, and left unharmed when possible. Vario had a rule about that. Don't hurt the drivers. Hurt drivers mean angry investigations. Compliant drivers mean paperwork and insurance claims. Step 4 was distribution. The stolen goods went straight to the junkyard. From there, Vario's network of fences moved product into the black market, sometimes within hours of the theft. Electronics ended up in discount shops. Pharmaceuticals moved through back-channel distributors. Clothing appeared in discount retail. Step 5 was revenue, and the revenue was enormous. FBI estimates put Vario's cargo theft operation at somewhere around $50 million between 1965 and 1978. The actual number was almost certainly higher. Most thefts were never reported. Companies absorbed the losses. Insurance companies paid out quietly. No one wanted the publicity of admitting their security had failed completely for 15 years. Cargo theft funded the whole enterprise, but it wasn't the only revenue stream. Vario also ran loan sharking operations across Brooklyn and Queens. The math was simple and brutal. Borrow $1,000 from Vario, you owe $30 to $50 in interest every single week, not annually. Weekly, the principal never decreases. You just pay the VIG indefinitely. Miss a payment, and Vario's enforcers made a house call. His loan shark clientele was the invisible economy of 1960s and 70s Brooklyn. Small business owners who couldn't access legitimate credit. Construction workers who lost their savings gambling. Desperate people in temporary situations that became permanent debt sentences. Vario made millions from this, quietly, steadily, every week. He also controlled gambling operations, numbers running, bookmaking. He took a percentage of labor union payments in industries the Lucchese's touched. He had interests in construction contracts. His money moved through car dealerships, restaurants, real estate. He paid his taxes, not all of them, not honestly, but he paid enough to avoid the IRS interest that had brought down Al Capone decades earlier. He'd learned from history. From the outside, Paul Vario was a semi-retired small businessman. He coached youth baseball in his neighborhood. He went to church. He was friendly with his neighbors, gracious with local shopkeepers, pleasant at community events. Behind that facade was a criminal organization generating millions annually and operating under the direct oversight of one of the 5 most powerful mafia families in the country. Every criminal enterprise is only as good as the people running it, and Vario had assembled, whether by design or circumstance, one of the most dangerous crews in New York. Henry Hill came into the orbit first. He was 14 years old, living across the street from a cab stand Vario used as a front business. Hill was Irish and Sicilian, which meant he could never be formally inducted into an Italian mafia family. He'd always be an associate, never a made man. That was a ceiling that would define and eventually destroy his relationship with Vario. But in the beginning, Hill was exactly what Vario wanted. Smart, hungry, loyal, eager to prove himself. Vario gave him small jobs, running numbers, delivering envelopes, parking cars. As Hill got older, the jobs grew. Truck hijackings, moving stolen merchandise, collecting debts from people who were very reluctant to pay. By the 1970s, Henry Hill was one of Vario's most valuable earners. He was also a problem Vario hadn't yet recognized. Jimmy Burke was a different kind of asset. Born 1931, orphaned young, raised through foster homes and juvenile facilities, Burke came up without anyone teaching him limits. moments. He was charming when he needed to be, violent when it was useful, and ruthlessly intelligent at all times. He planned crimes the way chess players plan games, 5 moves ahead, accounting for every possible complication. Vario valued that intelligence. He also feared what it might produce if it ever turned in the wrong direction. Burke was loyal to money and to whoever provided it. That was both his value and his danger. Then there was Tommy DeSimone. If Burke was calculated violence, DeSimone was pure impulse. He killed people who annoyed him. He hurt people for entertainment. He was useful for exactly one thing, being in a room where someone needed to be terrified or eliminated, and he was extraordinarily good at that one thing. In 1970, DeSimone murdered William Bentvena, a made member of the Gambino family, during a dispute at a bar. It was a catastrophic mistake. You don't kill a made man without permission from the bosses. Doing so without sanction creates an obligation, a debt that has to be settled. Vario knew the debt would eventually come due. There was nothing he could do about it. In January 1979, DeSimone was summoned to what he believed was his own making ceremony, his induction into the family. He dressed up. He was excited. It was a murder scene he walked into, not a ceremony. Shot once in the head. A message returned to the Gambino family. The debt is paid. Vario had known it was coming. He said nothing to DeSimone, because in that world some things cannot be avoided and should not be warned against. The warning itself becomes a liability. The Lufthansa heist wasn't Paul Vario's idea. It was Jimmy Burke's. Burke had been developing the plan for years, cultivating inside contacts at the airport, mapping the security protocols, identifying the window of vulnerability. When he brought it to Vario, the math was compelling. $6 million sitting in a vault, minimally guarded, accessible through a network of insiders Burke had already built. Vario approved it. December 11th, 1978. A crew of around 8 men entered the Lufthansa cargo building at JFK. They moved efficiently. They knew exactly where to go because their insiders had told them exactly where to go. In under an hour, they had loaded $6 million in cash and jewelry into their vehicles and driven away. No shots fired, no police response, no witnesses who could talk. It was a perfect robbery. And then Jimmy Burke made it catastrophic, because $6 million is a number that creates problems. That much money means a federal investigation unlike anything the crew had seen before. The FBI dedicated enormous resources to it. Agents started pulling threads, and threads led to people. Burke's solution was to eliminate the threads. Over the next several months, the people involved in the Lufthansa heist started dying. Strangulation, gunshot wounds, bodies found in car trunks, bodies never found at all. Burke was systematically removing everyone who could connect him to the robbery. 8 people associated with the heist died in the following year. The FBI investigation, which might have stalled for lack of witnesses, now had a sprawling murder investigation running parallel to the robbery case. Vario watched this happen and understood it was over. Not immediately, not visibly, but the machine he'd spent 30 years building was grinding toward destruction, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The first serious blow had actually come earlier, in 1972. Brooklyn District Attorney Eugene Gold had launched a major organized crime investigation. He obtained court approval for surveillance. In April of that year, law enforcement agents secretly entered Vario's junkyard trailer and planted listening devices. For 6 months, they recorded everything. Conversations about hijacked cargo, loan shark collections, payoffs to union officials, the inner workings of the operation Vario had spent years insulating from exactly this kind of exposure. In October 1972, the junkyard was raided. Vario and several crew members were arrested. The indictments covered federal hijacking charges, state conspiracy, witness tampering. On April 6, 1973, Paul Vario was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. He served 4. He was released in 1977 1987. He went to Florida. He told people he was retiring. That lasted less than a year. By 1978, he was back in New York, back in the life, because Paul Vario did not know how to be anything other than what he was. But the environment had changed. The FBI had evolved. The RICO statute, the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, had given federal prosecutors a new weapon that could target entire criminal organizations rather than individual crimes. They weren't trying to convict Vario for a single robbery anymore. They were trying to dismantle the entire network, and Henry Hill was about to hand them the key. By the late 1970s, Hill had developed a serious cocaine habit. He had started dealing drugs on the side, which directly violated Vario's most explicit standing order: no drugs. Drugs brought federal attention. Drugs made people unreliable. Drugs got people arrested, and then, in a moment of desperate calculation, drugs made people talk. When Vario found out, he didn't threaten Hill. He didn't have him hurt. He handed him $3,200, a final payment, generous under the circumstances, and told him, "We're done. Don't come around anymore." It was a controlled severance. Vario thought it was clean. It wasn't. In May 1980, Henry Hill was arrested on federal drug trafficking charges. He was facing 25 years to life. His wife was also arrested. He had 2 young children. He had no money left. He was deep in a cocaine addiction, and federal prosecutors sat across from him with a very specific offer: testify against Paul Vario, against Jimmy Burke, against the Lucchese family. In exchange, witness protection, new identity, freedom. Henry Hill took the deal. And when Paul Vario heard the news, he understood with absolute clarity what it meant. Hill's testimony was surgical in its damage. He knew everything. He had been inside the operation for 16 years. He testified about cargo thefts going back to the 1960s. He described the loan shark operations in detail. He provided testimony about specific murders. He connected Vario to the approval of the Lufthansa heist. He named names, gave dates, placed people at specific locations on specific nights. He was, by any objective measure, the most damaging witness in the history of Lucchese family prosecutions. In 1984, Paul Vario was convicted of extortion. A Florida businessman had been shaking for protection payments under threat of violence. A textbook mob extortion case. Hill's testimony confirmed what the evidence already showed. Vario was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. He was 70 years old. He had chronic emphysema from decades of unfiltered cigarettes in smoke-filled rooms. He had heart disease. He was not a well man. 10 years was a death sentence wearing the clothes of a prison sentence. The Federal Medical Center in Fort Worth, Texas, is where the federal government sends inmates who are too sick to survive in a standard facility. It's a prison that looks, from certain angles, like a hospital. Paul Vario was sent there in his early 70s. He could barely walk. His lungs were failing. He spent his final years in a hospital ward under the watch of corrections officers who stood there, not because he posed any threat, but because of what he had once been. He was visited occasionally by family. His wife, his children, the men he had built his empire with were gone. Burke was in prison. DeSimone was dead. Hill was in witness protection somewhere in America under a name no one knew. The crew that had hijacked trucks at JFK, that had moved millions in stolen goods through the Canarsie junkyard, that had terrified an entire borough of New York. They were dead, incarcerated, or cooperating. The Lucchese family had restructured and moved on. New capos had absorbed Vario's territories. The machine kept turning without him, because that's what machines do. On May 3rd, 1988, Paul Vario stopped breathing. Respiratory failure, lung cancer, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. He was 73 years old. The New York Times ran a short obituary. A few sentences. It called him a convicted gangster and a leader in the Lucchese crime family. No tributes, no ceremony, just a paragraph marking the end. His body was returned to New York. He was buried on Long Island. A small, quiet funeral. Family only. No wise guys, no procession. Because in 1988, being publicly associated with Paul Vario was an FBI surveillance event. He died broke. The government had seized his assets. frozen his accounts, sold his properties. 30 years of criminal enterprise had left him with nothing at the end except a prison uniform and a casket. The junkyard on Avenue D in Canarsie doesn't exist anymore. The property was sold, redeveloped. Today, it's a warehouse complex. No plaque, no marker, nothing to indicate that the most successful cargo theft operation in New York history was run from a trailer on that exact piece of ground for 20 years. That erasure is appropriate. It's exactly what Vario would have wanted. He never wanted fame. He explicitly avoided it. While John Gotti was giving press conferences and wearing $2,000 suits and courting tabloid attention in the 1980s, Vario had spent 30 years doing everything possible to be invisible. No headlines, no profile, no persona, just money. Quietly accumulated, carefully protected. It didn't save him. Goodfellas gave Paul Vario a kind of immortality he would have despised. Paul Sorvino played Paulie Cicero with dignity and restraint, calm authority, quiet menace, paternal control. It's a good performance. In some ways, it's an accurate portrayal. But movies compress and simplify. They need characters to serve narrative functions. In Goodfellas, Paulie is the structure that Henry Hill operates inside of. The movie is Henry's story, told from Henry's perspective, filtered through Henry's guilt and nostalgia and self-justification. The real Paul Vario was the story. Hill was a footnote who survived to tell it. What the movie doesn't capture is the scale of what Vario actually built. The FBI estimated his criminal earnings across his career at over $30 million. In 1960s through 1980s dollars, that converts to well over $150 million today. And those are only the earnings the government could document. The actual total was almost certainly higher. What the movie also doesn't capture is the cost of what Vario built. The loan shark operation wasn't an abstraction. It was working-class families in Brooklyn and Queens, people already stretched thin, trapped in debt they could never mathematically escape. The interest was designed to be permanent. The principle was a fiction. You paid forever or you got hurt. The hijacking crews didn't terrorize companies. They terrorized drivers. Ordinary men trying to deliver ordinary cargo, suddenly facing armed men, getting bound and left on the side of a road, sometimes badly hurt, permanently traumatized. Vario's rule about not hurting drivers was a business rule, not a moral one. When hurting drivers was useful, they got hurt. The violence was constant, and it was real. Vario didn't pull triggers himself. He had people for that. But he ordered the results, approved the outcomes, and absorbed the profits that violence protected. He was not a good man. He was an extremely effective criminal. There's a version of Paul Vario's story that tries to contextualize him. Immigrant community, limited opportunities, a world where organized crime offered paths that legitimate society didn't. That context is real. It explains something. It doesn't excuse anything. Vario made choices. 30 years of daily choices. Every morning he woke up and chose the life he had chosen. He kept choosing it after his first arrest at 16. He kept choosing it after federal prison at 59. He kept choosing it until the choice was made for him. Henry Hill's betrayal haunted him until the end. In prison, people would ask him about Goodfellas, about Hill, about the hijackings. He would shake his head and say nothing. The betrayal wasn't just professional. Vario had treated Hill like family, given him opportunities, protection, income, identity. Hill had been a street kid with nothing, and Vario had made him someone, and Hill repaid that by sitting in front of a federal grand jury and methodically dismantling everything Vario had built. But here's the thing. Henry Hill didn't destroy Paul Vario. Paul Vario made the choices that destroyed Paul Vario. He chose to trust a man he knew was unreliable. He chose to cut Hill loose without calculating the risk. He chose to approve the Lufthansa heist despite knowing its scale created unprecedented exposure. He chose to come back from Florida and back into the life when retirement was still possible. Those were his decisions. And in the mafia, decisions have consequences. Vario knew that better than almost anyone. He had watched other men make those mistakes for decades. He had profited from their collapses, and then, eventually, he made the same mistakes himself. The Lucchese family is still operating today, diminished, under constant surveillance, a shadow of what it was. But it exists because organized crime isn't about individuals, it's about systems. Vario was an important part of the system for 30 years. When he went down, the system absorbed the loss and kept moving. That's the final irony of Paul Vario's story. He spent 40 years building something. He earned millions. He commanded loyalty. He sat at tables with the most powerful men in American organized crime. And when he was gone, the machine barely noticed. He died in a prison hospital in Texas, 1,000 miles from the Brooklyn streets where he had built everything. His name is known today mostly because a movie made his fictional counterpart famous. The real man, the actual architect, the careful businessman, the cold approver of violence, has been mostly forgotten. That's not an accident. That's exactly what happens when you spend your whole life trying to be invisible. You disappear. If this story hit different than the movie, if you want the real history behind the headlines, subscribe right now. We drop one of these every week. The actual stories behind the organized crime cases you think you already know. Drop a comment below. Tell us who you want covered next. There are hundreds of men like Paul Vario, bosses who built empires, stayed out of the spotlight, and got swallowed by history. We're going to find every single one of them. Hit subscribe. Don't miss the next one.